Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm the content creator for visionandprophecy.com. In this video, I want to cover the biblical prophetic beasts that are found in Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Revelation 13 through 19. In this, I'll also cover the Harlot of Babylon and the identity of that individual. And I also want to cover the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which are found in the first four seals of Revelation 6. I want to present all of this in the context of, first, why I approach the interpretation of these beasts and signs the way that I approach them. I'm going to give scripture to back up my approach. And then I want to also highlight that I'm taking the approach that is supported by my previous videos, that I believe that the fulfillment of biblical prophecy is imminent. I believe that there are a variety of reasons to think that, which I've presented in previous videos, and I intend to do a future recap, sort of summarized version of the things that I think make that argument, and then also a few new things that I've discovered since I've made my previous videos. But as far as this video is concerned, focusing on the beasts and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and how I think that they might match up with the current state of the world. So, with that, first let's start with the prophetic beasts. In Daniel chapter 7, we are introduced to the concept of prophetic beasts, which are symbolic animals that represent something in prophecy. And I'm going to use the scripture to help us understand what it is that they're representing. For the sake of establishing some structure on how to interpret, I'm actually going to start in verse 17 of Daniel 7, which says, "These four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth." That explanation is provided to Daniel the prophet to explain the vision that Daniel has received while he is in exile in Babylon. So I put emphasis first on the word shall, because Daniel is already in Babylon. The Babylonian Empire has arisen, and if you do any research at all on the Daniel 7 beasts, you will find many people believe that those beasts represent ancient kingdoms, and they'll say that these four beasts are the four kingdoms or empires that conquested Israel, being Babylon for the lion, Medo-Persia for the bear, Greece for the four-headed leopard, and then Rome for the fourth multi-headed, seven-headed beast. I'm here to tell you that is an incorrect interpretation of this chapter, and that's not my opinion or my interpretation. People who advocate for that interpretation have not read the entire chapter, because Daniel has the vision, and then Daniel receives explanation of what the vision is from an angel. And that's part of what we're getting in verse 17, is that the angel is telling Daniel, the four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. Daniel, again, is in Babylonian captivity. So Babylon, the empire of Babylon, has already risen. When he receives this prophecy, they've not only already risen, but they've already conquested Israel. So that would make the first beast not prophetic in any sense, for starters. And the tense that the angel uses in the account, saying that the kingdoms or kings shall arise, would be incorrect. Because that empire has already risen. While I'm on verse 17, I'll also highlight that the angel tells him that the beasts are four kings, so that we come to understand that the beasts represent kings in some capacity. Verse 23, he gave me this explanation, he again being the angel giving Daniel the explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. So now we get, within just a couple of verses of each other, that the beasts represent kings and kingdoms, and that's not too much of a stretch of the imagination to understand that kings are representative of their kingdoms, and that kings and kingdoms can sort of be interconnectedly represented by symbols, because a king is the leader of a kingdom or the head of a kingdom, and for that matter, elsewhere you'll find that the heads can represent kings, and likewise the horns of the heads, which I'll show you in a moment. Speaking of the horns, in verse 21, This is Daniel saying, "As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom." So these two verses show that the fourth beast makes war against the saints and is prevailing until the Ancient of Days, being Jesus, comes. And that's Jesus' second coming, which gives us then the placement of that fourth beast. That fourth beast is a immediate is a kingdom that is in place when Jesus comes for his second coming. And he's winning against the saints. He's persecuting and killing saints, making war and winning right up until Jesus comes. And then we find that judgment is passed, and obviously this beast kingdom then loses to Jesus and the heavenly kingdom that is then established on earth for the 1,000-year millennial reign, which is found in Revelation 20 and 21. And then, there's additional details that are described after that. But so that establishes that this set of prophetic beasts are actually end times prophecy, and they're immediately before the establishment of the millennial reign. And I probably should have said earlier that it's my belief that the biblical text supports the concept that the major categories of end times events that will occur will be first the rapture. There will be conflicts and wars and things, but first the rapture, then a 7-year tribulation period, and then the second coming of Jesus Christ and the establishment of the millennial reign, the millennial kingdom, 1,000-year kingdom of heaven established on earth. All of that's in the Bible. I think I present a lot of that in my previous videos, but that's the context in which I'm operating here. And it's in verse 21 and 22 that we find that fourth beast is immediately before Jesus' second coming and the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Now, I mentioned earlier that some people interpret these beasts as ancient kingdoms, and while I think that's an incorrect interpretation of chapter 7, that is a correct interpretation of chapter 8. So I just thought that I would highlight quickly that there are other prophetic beasts mentioned in Daniel 8. It's actually here that we find Medo-Persia rather than the bear. Medo-Persia is represented as a ram, and it's also here that we find Greece, not as a four-headed leopard, but instead as a goat. And in my picture, I have 4 horns. The goat initially has 1 great horn, and then the horn splits into 4. And so you can see that the great horn represents Alexander the Great, and then the horn dividing is that pretty shortly after Alexander was successful in establishing the Greek Empire, he died, and his generals then divided the kingdom into 4 parts, his 4 generals. So we have historic context to see how all of that fits with this prophecy. It also gives us confirmation of the things that I've been saying, that the beasts can represent both kings and kingdoms. And in this particular case, the horn itself is specific to the kings as it relates to the goat. So it's not that none of the beasts are representative of ancient kingdoms, but Daniel 7, we get an interpretation from an angel that excludes that from proper interpretation. Back to Daniel 7. The first beast is a eagle-winged lion, and because I know that this is speaking of end times prophecy, and because I believe that end times are imminent, I look to interpret these beasts with kingdoms or governments of the world that are already in place, and I'm using common knowledge and cultural cues to help with that interpretation, because the intention of Scripture is that we have the ability to come to an understanding. The understanding is being provided to us, and so I believe that that's a thing that we can do. In the case of this beast, the lion most likely would connect to Israel. Israel represents itself as the lion in official communications from time to time in various ways. There's also biblical precedent for Israel being associated with a lion. But this particular lion is described as having eagle's wings, and I think that that also is applicable to our current circumstances of the world, in that the United States, which is obviously associated with the eagle, is in alliance with the lion and provides specifically, most recently, Air Force military support, and has executed strikes and things of that nature with regard to the alliance that these two governmental bodies share. The prophecy for the lion goes on to say that the wings are forcibly removed. The word is interpreted as plucked or ripped. So there's a forceful removal of the support of the eagle's wings from the lion. I'll mention too, since we're talking about the wings, that eagle's wings given to Israel is also represented in Revelation 12. I don't really cover that chapter very much in this particular video. I think I covered it in a previous video. Definitely have it on my website. But the eagle's wings being given to Israel is something that is elsewhere in prophecy. So that further supports the notion that the lion is Israel at the very least. It's a weaker supported interpretation of the wings being the United States, as there is no mention of the United States in the Bible that I'm aware of, at least not directly. But I think that this might be an instance where the wings are alluded to, and what I think would potentially happen next will help support that, because what I think is going to happen is that I think that the eagle's wings are going to be forcibly removed from the lion, and that the lion is lifted up and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. So the lion is caused to establish itself on its own, so to speak. It's given the mind of a man, which implies that it's moving away from sort of more beastly behaviors and thinking and approach to situations, and instead is shifting to more of a conscientious type of approach or strategy, less beastly. So again, I think that this beast is most likely Israel. The wings seem to, in the current climate, fit with the United States military support, and it appears that that support is at some point going to be removed from Israel, and Israel will be caused to stand alone. The next beast is the bear. This one's a little just as straightforward, if not more straightforward. The bear is described as being raised up on one side and chewing on 3 ribs in its mouth, and it's told to arise and devour much flesh. Now, culturally, obviously, the bear is most easily associated with Russia. And as it happens, Russia is currently in conflict in Ukraine. It's also raised up, so to speak, on its western side, both in an aggressive standpoint for Ukraine, but also in a defensive standpoint as it relates to Europe and the UN, which it cites as some of the reasoning for why it invaded Ukraine in the first place. I think there's more than one reason for why they chose to invade, but at any rate, Russia is raised specifically on its western side. I would highlight, too, that the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has been outspoken about his sort of tendencies towards conquest and imperialism. He had a very lengthy interview with Tucker Carlson a year or 2 back, where he goes through effectively the entire history of Russia and makes argument for why various territories that are not currently Russia should be part of Russia. So he has made it pretty clear that he has conquest in mind to some degree. And I think that the attack on Ukraine is at least in part justified by that line of thinking. So as far as this prophetic bear is concerned, he is chewing on 3 ribs, which gives an indication that a conquest or military type of violent type of action has been successful, and it is feeding on that, finishing up, so to speak. And it's told to, in that moment, after its military conflict has been concluded, or is in the process of being concluded, it's told to arise and devour much flesh. So this would indicate to me that it rises to a new level of conflict. And there's a couple of ways in which I would speculate that could potentially occur. One would be with consideration to the Baltic states, because there are 3 ribs. Russia has been clearly interested in testing the waters of a potential invasion of the Baltic states. There's 3 of those, so that could potentially be the ribs if we were to see Russia move into those territories in the near future. That could possibly be an interpretation of that. Alternatively, the ribs could be representative of the current conflict in Ukraine, with Russia kind of finishing that up. And then, as I've already kind of alluded to, with the wings being removed from the lion mentioned directly before the bear, it's possible that the bear rising to devour much flesh may be associated and simultaneous to the wings being removed from the lion. And what that would potentially look like is Russia attacking the United States. And one way or another, the conflict between Russia and the United States resulting in the support being removed from Israel. We definitely see some geopolitical potential for a situation like that, but of course that's extremely speculative, just trying to interpret some of the additional details here around the beast. At any rate, I believe the bear is Russia. The third beast, this is the weakest of the beasts interpretations that I have for you, but I still think that it stands, which is why I'm presenting it. The third beast is a winged leopard. It's supposed to have 4 wings, so ignore that I only have 2 wings in the image, if you would, please. I'm using AI to generate these images, and it is a pain to get it to include all of the details. So this was as close as I could get, but I think it's effective enough. 4 heads, 4 wings, and the wings are of a bird. It does not say eagle in this instance. And it says that this beast has dominion. And I think that's the key piece here. So this beast of the 4 beasts, or rather of the first 3 beasts, is the one that has authority. And so the implication there is worldly authority. This is a world government body that has dominion. And so for that reason, the UN looks to be the most likely candidate for the interpretation of this beast. I get some further support from the image here of a statue that's outside of the New York headquarters of the UN. As you can see, it doesn't have 4 heads, but it is a winged leopard. Also, it has 2 wings instead of 4, like my image. But it is a winged leopard, so there is an association of winged leopard to the UN of its own accord. And so that certainly helps. And then again, it having the authority makes sense. There's a couple things that I would highlight that make this interpretation weak. For starters, the 4 head gives an indication of either 4 kings or 4 administrative type of bodies, whereas the UN has 6 principal organs. That being said, there are only 4 of those principal organs that are administrative policy-making organizations within the UN body. The other 2, one is the Security Council, so that would be the military arm of the UN, and then the other is a monitoring, administrative monitoring body. It doesn't actually produce any policy. I think it's specifically financial monitoring. So it's possible that the 4 heads could maybe give representation of those 4 administrative portions of the body. Another potential interpretation there would be that from considering the Security Committee, the United States, China, Russia, the UK, and France are the 5 most influential members. They all have a permanent membership, and they have the right to veto, which gives them, effectively greater influence than the rest of the nations that are involved. But we could potentially eliminate one or two of these with potential circumstances in the future, one being that Russia has already been described as the bear. If Russia were to rise and eat much flesh, it's possible that they would find themselves no longer associated with the UN or excluded in some capacity. The other side of that equation would be that if Russia were to rise and eat much flesh against the United States, that could potentially explain why the wings are removed, and then also could explain why the United States might not be included in the current list of 5 most influential members. That list could then potentially be reduced to 4, and thus we would have a UN with 4 heads instead of 5. Obviously, those things are all very speculative, and at the moment, I don't have a good explanation for why it would have 4 heads instead of 5 or 6, based off of the current circumstances of the UN. So again, I think this is probably the weakest portion of the interpretations that I'm providing here, but my reasoning for why is that I'm approaching again from the current geopolitical climate, and the UN is waning, but has technically still has the world governance sort of administrative authority because of all the member nations. But that's starting to come into question as it starts to lose influence. And I should highlight too that another potential way in which the U.S. would potentially be removed from that list of 5 is that most recently Donald Trump has been cutting ties with the UN in various ways, reducing and removing funding, removing U.S. involvement in many of the programs and committees. There's not a full sever of the ties there yet, but that is something that has been ongoing for the last, say, year, 2 years or so. So it's possible that the U.S. could step out of this for that reason as well. Now, the 4th beast is the one that's going to require the most explanation. But first, the information that's provided in Daniel on the 4th beast is that it's terrifying, it's dreadful, it's exceedingly strong, it has iron teeth, it's devouring, it's breaking things into pieces, and then stamping or stomping what remains. And it's described as being different from the rest of the beasts. But I believe that this should actually be interpreted as being transformed from the rest, the other 3. And the reason why I think that is, if you look at the original Hebrew, the word that's translated for different comes from the root word shina, which better translates to changed or altered. And then there absolutely is a Hebrew word in there that is the word from. So instead of different from, we get changed or altered from. And so the way that I would then interpret that is, I think that the 3 beasts that we see in the beginning of Daniel 7 seem to come together very much in the same sense as the way that the 4-headed leopard, if it represents the UN, would already be representative of multiple countries or governing bodies combined together, hence the multiple heads. This beast is not described as having multiple heads in Daniel 7. However, because I've already established that this beast is an immediate preface to the millennial kingdom, we know that this is an end times beast, and therefore there's actually additional scripture that's applicable to this beast as well. This beast is actually, the 4th beast of Daniel 7 is actually also the beast, the first beast of the sea of Revelation 13. In Revelation 13, we get additional details about the beast and a confirming clue, which is that the beast is described as being like a leopard with feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. And so this beast appears to have characteristics of the first 3 beasts. And therefore, this beast is a changed or altered form, amalgamation, combination of the first 3 beasts, therefore confirming my adjusted interpretation of the Hebrew. Revelation 13 goes on to say that this particular beast is given power and authority from the dragon, and the dragon is identified in the previous chapter, Revelation 12, as Satan. And you see that thematically throughout the text, most obviously all the way back in Genesis when the serpent, Satan, is in the garden. But Revelation 12 already gives the confirmation that the dragon is Satan. The other thing that you get out of Revelation 13 is that this beast has association with another organization, which is of a religious persuasion that's commonly referred to as the false prophet. In Revelation 13, it's called the beast of the earth, and I'll highlight the characteristics of it in a moment. But the thing that you need to know for the sake of this beast is that the false prophet causes the world to worship the beast of the sea, which is the fourth beast of Daniel 7. What seems like the most likely interpretation then, as I've kind of already outlined, is that this beast would be a transformed combination of the previous beasts, forming some kind of a world government body. We learn later, and which I'll present in greater detail in my next video, that this beast is headed by the Antichrist, not initially, but eventually. The Antichrist becomes the horn that leads this beast, the king that leads this beast. Another thing that I think is really noteworthy about the description of this beast that is really easy to miss is that in the description it says that it has the mouth of a lion. And then it's a few verses later that we learn that from its mouth it utters blasphemies. And so that makes a connection of the part that Israel is playing in this beast with the blasphemies that are being uttered. And so that gives us some context to what's happening potentially religiously there, that would potentially result in Israel uttering blasphemies in association with the religious organization and worship of this beast. More on that in a moment as well. Now, let's talk about the false prophet. The false prophet is called the beast of the earth in Revelation 13. It's described as having two horns and is like a lamb and speaks like a dragon. Now, some versions of the Bible will say that this beast has two horns like a lamb. It has two horns like a lamb. Others will say this beast has two horns and is like a lamb, or is like the lamb. The Greek in this case happens to support the translation of it has two horns and is like a lamb. The word "and" is not in there, but like you would need to add a comma. It has two horns, it's like a lamb, or it's like the lamb. And then it also is said to speak like a dragon, which implies that it has association with Satan, which I just highlighted earlier. And we already know that Satan gives the previous beast, the beast of the sea, his authority. And so dominion and authority goes to the beast of the sea. So it makes sense that there would be some satanic tendencies associated with this beast that's causing the world to worship the previous beast, the beast of the sea, the fourth beast of Daniel. Other things to say about this beast is that it deceives people, the people of the earth, by performing great signs, which includes but is not limited to fire coming from heaven to earth, and it will do that publicly. It develops an image or an idol of the beast, which will have the ability to speak. And so what I gather from this is that this beast would be a religious organization. It probably will have two leaders because it has two horns, and we see elsewhere that horns are representative of kings or leaders of the organization. And it will appear to be like the lamb. And because it's like a lamb, there's actually, the lamb is a reference to Jesus. The lamb is a reference to the Messiah, and therefore the association of this beast looking like the lamb implies that this beast will look like the church, the Christian church. It'll look like followers of Jesus. However, this is a false prophet. There's a deception that's happening here. And there's more on that in just a minute, but let me go a little bit deeper on the Revelation 13 beast. Moving to Revelation 17, this will give us a little bit more context. Revelation 17, the beast has 7 heads, which are 7 mountains. So now we learn that heads aren't necessarily just kings, but they're mountains. And then we see in verse 10, they're also 7 kings. So they represent kings, they represent mountains. 5 of those kings have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. I'll touch on that more with Antichrist, the Antichrist video that would come in the next video. But I'm going to skip past that part for now and just say that the heads are 7 kings and also 7 mountains. In verse 11, we get context that this beast is an eighth beast, but it belongs to the 7. So I think this is actually a reference to the number of prophetic beasts that are represented in the Bible, and that this particular beast goes to destruction. And then we learn that the 10 horns that are on this beast are 10 kings, so representing 10 kings, which have not yet received royal power, but they will receive authority as kings for 1 hour, and they will give that authority to the beast. There's potentially connection there of those kings to Satan then, because we know in Revelation 13 that it's Satan that gives his authority to this beast. So just something to consider there. And then the 13 says that those kings are of one mind, they hand their power over to the beast. Verse 14 says, they will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. So there you get an example of the Lamb being associated with Jesus, but not the Lamb in the previous Revelation 13 description that speaks like a dragon. So we've got somebody that's impersonating a lamb, effectively. And that's going to be really important in a moment. Revelation 17 also introduces another symbolic character to our mix here that has association with the beast, the 4th beast of Daniel. This character is called the Harlot of Babylon, and we learned that the Harlot of Babylon is riding on the beast of Daniel 7, Revelation 13, and so on. The first thing we need to know about her is actually in the very last verse of this chapter, which is that she's a city. You'll find that many people online will refer to the Harlot of Babylon as the United States, which cannot be the case because it is a city. We also see that the harlot is in the wilderness, seated on the 7-headed beast. She performs adulteries with the kings of the earth. She's dressed in purple and scarlet. She's glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. She's drunk on the abominations of her adulteries. And she goes to destruction by the beast. So the beast is effectively killing her, but she's riding him. And my interpretation of this is that it's Jerusalem. And I know that many people that have studied prophecy are probably going to disagree with that, but I have a lot of reasons why. I present this information on my website, but just quickly going over it with some cross-references. The description of Mystery Babylon, quote-unquote, Babylon the Harlot. First, again, she's a city which has dominion over the kings of the earth. That's Revelation 17:18. You find the connection of that to Jerusalem specifically in Ezekiel 5:5. It mentions that the beast and the 10 kings hate her, but the 10 kings grieve her destruction. That's something that will be more telling for in the future when it actually comes to pass. I have some ideas as far as the 10 kings are concerned, but not presenting that at the moment. Revelation 17:9 indicates that she sits on the beast, which is on 7 hills or 7 mountains, which she's seated. Jerusalem is situated on 7 hills, 7 mountains. There are a couple other cities in the world that also have that description, but it's definitely true of Jerusalem. She's described as being clothed in purple and scarlet linen. Specifically, if you look at Ezekiel 16:10 and Ezekiel 13, you'll find that there's a description of Israel being dressed in fine linen and costly garments. You'll find in Ezekiel 26:31 and Exodus 28 that it's actually Israel's priests' garments that are specifically purple and scarlet and linen. And then also, for that matter, the things that the priests wear are adorned with jewelry. The high priest in particular has a breastplate that has jewels on it that represent the 12 tribes. And then Revelation 17:4 indicates that she holds a golden cup that's full of abominations and impurities. In Ezekiel 16:36 and Jeremiah 15:17, we find that Israel's lusts are poured out with her lovers. And elsewhere, which is, it's mentioned in Revelation 17:5, but then in Ezekiel 16:15, 26 through 29, chapter 35, and then Jeremiah 25:15 through 17, Israel is accused of prostitution and adultery. And it's specifically in association to idolatry. So the idea here is that Israel is conquested and has relationships with other nations, and in doing so, they lose their trueness to God, their God, and instead adopt other practices, idolatry practices, adulterous practices, in God's words. And that's then where the description of the kings fallen and is and has not yet come starts to come into perspective a little bit. Revelation 17:3 and then 7 through 11, she's riding the beast with 7 heads. They're 7 kingdoms, and we find throughout the Old Testament that Israel has 6 initially, 6 initial kingdoms that it has a prominent relationship with. Egypt, the Assyrians, the Babylon/Chaldeans, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And so it's here that we find those ancient kingdoms as Israel's past lovers. And Rome in particular is where the riddle of it is and has not yet come and is going to destruction starts to take shape. That there's a form of Rome that was, there's a form of Rome that has not yet come as of the writing of the text, and then there's a variation, a conglomeration of kingdoms that includes a portion of Rome or a variation of Rome that is not but will be and will go to destruction, and that is the beast that she's riding. But all of those heads are part of that beast. Now, the other thing that I would highlight here is that in John chapter 4, Jesus has an encounter with a Samaritan woman at the well. And it might seem like out of left field that I would bring this up, but in John chapter 4, verse 17 and 18, that woman is described as having 5 past husbands. And the current man that she's with is not her husband. And the context of when this information is, when Jesus is making this statement, is that Israel is currently under the rule of Rome. And so we find that, as an example of typology and pattern in the Bible, that as Jesus is talking about the Samaritan woman, he's also depicting the circumstances and situation of Israel. He's representing a woman who has had adulterous relationship with 5 past husbands, and the current man she's with, representing Rome, is not her husband either. That God is their husband, and they've forgotten their first love. So that's more detail than I really meant to cover on this particular part, but there you have it. There's more of that on the website. But Ezekiel 16, I think in particular, if you were to read it side by side with Revelation 17's description, you will find that they match up 1-to-1. So Jerusalem is the Harlot of Babylon. And again, like I said earlier, it's not that there can't be more than one thing that's indicated. In fact, the Bible itself even states that these beasts are representative of kings and kingdoms, and there's horns sometimes, and then there's multiple heads and things like that. So there's multiple things that are going on here. It's not that it can't represent more than one thing at the same time, but this absolutely represents Israel, at least. Now, I see my slides cut off here a little bit. Sorry for that, but for talking about these beasts, it starts to become relevant then, now that I've identified that there is some connection to the ancient kingdoms, to go back to Daniel 2, where we get a dream that's given to Nebuchadnezzar of a statue that represents kingdoms that conquested Israel. So as you can see, we already got the prophecy of what the kingdoms are that are going to conquest Israel. But notice that when we get to the fourth kingdom, Iron or Rome, that's where it starts to get dicey, so to speak, for many people if they're not very familiar with history. Rome ultimately gets divided, just like the legs are divided, and Rome has been what was the Roman government has been sort of duplicated over into Western culture, in the way in which our governments function, in some of our societal things, even in some of the language that we use in our legislation, is inspired by Rome. And so there's a bit of Rome that still exists even today, even though it's not technically the empire that it was. And so just like the leg thins at the ankle approaching the feet, Rome has degraded and thinned as time has gone on, but is still represented in our current culture in a divided kingdom format. And I say all of that to say that I believe that the end times are imminent, and so therefore I believe that what's described at the end of this vision of the feet of iron and clay, and then the heavenly stone, which is the heavenly kingdom, are what are to come. So if we're looking for something that happens between Rome, the division of Rome, and what happens between Rome and the heavenly kingdom being established, it's the fourth beast, the beast that we're talking about. And so therefore the feet, iron and clay feet, represent Rome, represent the beast, but there's a clay mixture in there, and that's a piece that I want to get to. Let's see. The other thing I want to highlight that I've already kind of mentioned is that these kingdoms are the ones that have committed adultery with the harlot, and that's again highlighted throughout the Old Testament text. Not included in this dream is not Egypt. First of all, they weren't really a conquesting nation. Israel goes into Egypt voluntarily because of famine and then becomes slaves. But there's still adulterous practices that happen there. They take idolatry with them and exhibit it in the wilderness relatively quickly. Assyria is also not mentioned here, and I believe that that's because Assyria's conquest predates this dream, because again, this is a dream that's given to Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So Assyria's conquest had already occurred, and therefore including Assyria in the vision wouldn't technically be prophetic at that point. But I'll highlight that excluding the kingdom of heaven coming at the end, there are 6 kingdoms that are mentioned, and again, Jesus points out the same thing to the Samaritan woman. The iron and clay feet are representative of the end times beast, the fourth beast of Daniel, the beast of Revelation 13, 17 through 19. And then the stone represents the heavenly kingdom, which destroys the feet, destroys the statue, and then expands to fill the whole earth, which is what is prophesied to happen for the millennial kingdom after all the other end times events have been fulfilled. So now focusing on the feet, the iron and clay feet are all that remain before the heavenly kingdom comes. Since the 5th century, the world society has been a divided and increasingly thinned version of Rome. I already mentioned this. Likewise, the legs thin at the ankles. Yep, I mentioned all that already. Apologies. So then now let's focus on the clay. Scripturally speaking, we can look at Isaiah 10, verses 5 and 6, Jeremiah 18:6, and Ezekiel 4:1 to make a connection of Israel and therefore Jerusalem to clay. And so we get further confirmation of what I described earlier, that the lion representing Israel and the bear and the leopard combine into that fourth beast. Here we see that the clay, Israel specifically, is what is combining into the iron and clay feet. But we don't see bronze and silver and gold also included in those feet. So the prophecy is not indicating that Babylon and Persia and Greece are also melded into these feet, but instead it's a version of Rome a version of the Roman Empire that then combines in with Israel and Jerusalem. And I think that we get that with the combination of the lion representing Israel, and then the UN and the bear combining together, with the UN in particular representing the largest portion of the Roman Empire. And then obviously Israel was a part of that at the time. The other thing that I wanted to highlight in this regard that helps support this is in Daniel 9:26, there's a prophecy related to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple that occurred in 70 AD. And it said that the people of the prince who is to come, they will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Those people are associated with the prince that is to come, which is the Antichrist, the leader of this beast that we're discussing. And so we get a hint then that the people, those are his people. The people that destroyed the temple and the city are the Antichrist's people. And this actually turns into a pretty interesting piece of the study in that, first, from a straightforward perspective, they're Roman soldiers. So Romans destroyed the city and the sanctuary. But if you dig a little deeper, you can actually learn about the individual legion that was stationed on the eastern side of Jerusalem in the Temple District during the siege of Jerusalem. And you'll find that that legion was largely made up of Syrian and Judean conscripts. So they would have been Middle Eastern soldiers hereditarily, but they would not have. But they would have also been Roman citizens. So they themselves represent the iron mixed with the clay. They're Roman citizens iron, but they're also Middle Eastern and potentially specifically Judean, which would be representative of that sort of Israel, Middle East peace. So bringing this all to a conclusion as far as the beasts are concerned, the eagle-winged lion appears to depict the current alliance relationship with Israel by the U.S. The wings provided from the eagle appear to be Air Force military support. And if this is correct, it would then prophesy that this alliance is going to eventually end when the wings are removed. It seems to indicate that would be forcibly removed, but the way in which that would actually play out could have a variety of different ways in which that comes to occur. But it appears that relationship will break at some point. Possibly simultaneously of the wings being removed, Russia, who is still chewing on its latest military efforts, will rise to military action to eat its fill of flesh, which I've already established because of its leaders' recent interviews. They have an imperialist conquesting appetite. So it looks as though there would be very specific countries that would be attacked, and also potentially include conflict with the United States, which might be the reason why the wings get plucked. And then all of that is in the context of the four-headed winged leopard, which I believe is the UN, having dominion for a time until the fourth beast arrives on the scene. Then, based on the scripture, the first three beasts of Daniel 7 combined together, are transformed into the fourth beast. This beast will be a Rome-like government. It's headed by the Antichrist, again, which I'll cover in greater detail in the next video. And specifically, the Antichrist would be in power during the second half of tribulation, which is what is represented in at least part of Revelation 13, where they're making war on the saints, and particularly the abomination of desolation. I didn't mention that earlier, but I mentioned that in previous videos. This beast is also what is represented by the iron portion of the feet of Daniel 2, and also the clay with the Israel component. The fourth beast of Daniel, Revelation 13, beast of the sea, is also associated with another world governmental body, which will have a religious aspect, and it will cause worship of the first beast. The religious body that's associated with it will perform signs and will have the appearance of Jesus, being like a lamb, but speaking satanic things, blasphemous things. It has 2 horns, so it's likely that that organization is going to have 2 leaders. I think the most likely interpretation of that, which I will cover in greater detail in the next video, is probably the Antichrist himself as a religious figure, because the worship is being caused towards him. But then also what I think is probably a false Jesus, someone representing themselves as Jesus, and then also performing signs would deceive many, and starts to explain why there might be worship involved here. But again, I'll do that in further detail in the next video. They'll also be performing miraculous signs and therefore deceive the world. The world government that's established in this beast will persecute and martyr believers. Jews, saints, it's actually the word is saints in the text. They'll be martyring and persecuting the saints until the second coming of Jesus Christ, at which point this beast and the false prophet will be defeated by the second coming of Jesus and the establishment of the heavenly kingdom. Before that occurs, Israel and Jerusalem, which is a portion of this beast, the clay portion, is destroyed. It's prophesied that Israel, or Jerusalem specifically, will be destroyed, and that represents the great prostitute in Revelation 17 and 18. And then I mentioned also that Satan goes with this beast to destruction as well. That's found in Revelation 19 and 20. The identity of the dragon being Satan is found in Revelation 12, and the authority of the dragon given to the beast in Revelation 13. Again, I'm going to cover this in greater detail in the next video, but just consider why the world would agree to worship the beast in the first place. The context here is that the rapture would have first occurred. So what you have is a body of believers that have been taken from the earth, and the rest of the world will want an explanation for that. Some people will recognize what it is, many won't, or will choose not to believe that it was the rapture. But everyone will need to reconcile that event with their worldview. The second thing is that the false prophet and the Antichrist will be performing miracles. So there will be individuals that will appear to have divine power. And I believe that they will also appear to fulfill other prophecy, which again, I'll highlight in the next video. Now, let me touch quickly on the Four Horsemen, which are the first 4 seals of Revelation 6. The first of these is the rider on the white horse with a bow who comes conquering and is given a crown. The second is a rider on a red horse with a great sword who takes peace from the earth and causes war. The rider on the black horse is the third, who is accompanied by inflation and or famine, is what that appears to be to me. And then the fourth rider is named Death, and rides on a pale green horse with Hades following after him. And it's here that a fourth of the earth's population is killed with sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. So what I take from this is there are effectively 4 stages of these first 4 seals. Someone, an individual, a leader, world leader, who has ranged capabilities with the bow, military capabilities, comes in a conquering stance and is given a crown. So it's not that he takes a crown, but rather that he's given one. Then that is followed by a different world leader with a strong amount of military capability, represented by the great sword, who takes peace from the earth. And then following the peace taken from the earth, you see inflation and famine, so economic woes, and then death follows with a fourth of the earth killed between the war that's presumably caused by the second rider, and then the famine and pestilence and things that follow afterwards. Now, as of January 1st this year, it's possible that we have had another celestial sign indicating that the timing is imminent. I think I've highlighted other celestial signs in my previous videos, and if not, I do have that information on the website. Revelation 6:1 is not presented as a celestial sign, so this might be too speculative on my part, but as you can see in the image, Sagittarius had a celestial alignment of 3 planets and the sun, where they were all in the crown, so to speak, of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius appears to be a centaur in most depictions, but is otherwise a rider on a horse, who received a crown of stars, and for that matter also has a laurel or a victor's crown already next to it in the first place, with the other constellation there, Corona Australis. This rider also has a bow, so it looks to potentially connect there. Could be a celestial indication of timing, and we know from the creation of the world in Genesis that the celestial bodies are made for signs and of seasons. So this could be an indication, a celestial indication, that the timing is imminent. Along the line of thinking, I want to highlight that a year ago, almost to the day, it would have been February 13th of 2025, that RFK Jr. was being interviewed, and he is quoted as saying, "We need a man on a white horse," and he's attributing that to Donald Trump. What he was saying in that moment was that we need a leader that is willing to stand up to the powers that exist already, being willing to step away from the normal flow of things as far as power and authority is concerned. Since then, Trump has worked largely through diplomacy, but with some long-ranged force in a couple of instances, and has established the Board of Peace, which looks to be a developing world governance organization that could rival the UN, or maybe even overtake it. This organization being organized by Trump, he has given himself the crown of this organization. He's given himself the power to name his own successor. He has the power to dissolve the Board of Peace at any time. For those reasons, he sounds like a king to me. Looks as though he's potentially trying to establish himself as king of the world. And this establishment of this board comes very shortly after the celestial sign that I just showed you on the previous slide. So just a little bit of a speculative idea, conclusion here, that if that celestial sign indeed indicates that the first seal has been opened, that we're moving through the process of tribulation about to begin, which I believe the seals preface the tribulation period, then the natural expectation is that the second seal would be on the way. So what we would be expecting then is the Red Rider, a leader that has massive military capability, represented by the Great Sword, would begin to take peace from the world. This would potentially coincide with the bear that I was representing earlier. If this were to be Russia and the bear rises to take its fill of flesh, he would potentially take peace from the earth at the same time. And what we see in the current world climate is conflict occurring. And what we see on the left of the image is the eagle-winged lion represented in Donald Trump and Netanyahu. And then on the right, we have potentially the representation of the bear, who has a strategic alliance with Iran. And the conflict between Israel and Iran is the focus of the world at the moment. Everyone's waiting with bated breath to figure out what's going to happen next. Also worth considering that the US and Russia and China are also at odds. China culturally being represented by the dragon, though I don't want to go any farther than that as a potential interpretation there at the moment. I think I have some ideas on that on my website, though, if you're curious about that. We have the looming Middle Eastern regional conflict. It could escalate to a regional conflict. It could escalate to a global conflict as a result because of the players that are involved. And Meanwhile, this is still in the context of the four-headed leopard, which I believe is the UN, that has made decisions in regards to Gaza and establishment of a Palestinian state, but they are not yet imposing their will on Israel. And it's been months now since they made their decisions and made it known to the world. So certainly some interesting things that are going to happen here, and it does look like it potentially lines up with both the rioters and the prophetic beasts. I think that's the end of my slides. So, as I said, these are all speculative interpretations. Hopefully I've represented well enough why I approach the beasts the way that I do. It's my intention to produce another video, hopefully within a quick succession of this video, that will expand on the Antichrist further and develop a little bit more what I think is going to happen with that fourth beast of Daniel, the beast of Revelation 13, and the false prophet. So hopefully you found this video interesting and helpful. Leave me a like or a comment or something just for a little bit of encouragement. But otherwise, like I said, I hope it helps with your understanding of Scripture. Thanks for watching.